My son-in-law invited my wife to visit him, come alone, and leave the old man at home. I overheard him whisper on the phone. I decided to show up unannounced. When I reached the door, a police officer pulled me aside. "Don't go in. We have an arrest warrant." I froze at the truth. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought I'd become the kind of husband who eavesdrops on phone calls. At 59, after 32 years of marriage to Marilyn, I believed we had built something unshakable. Trust was our foundation, or so I thought until that Tuesday evening, when everything began to crumble. I was in my study, reviewing some paperwork from the hardware store I've managed for the past 15 years, when I heard Marilyn's voice drift from the kitchen. She was on the phone, and something about her tone made me pause. It wasn't her usual cheerful chatter with our daughter Sarah or her book club friends. This was different, hushed, almost secretive. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice strained in a way I hadn't heard in years. "It's getting too complicated." My pen stopped moving across the invoice I was checking. Marilyn had been acting differently lately, but I'd attributed it to stress from her part-time job at the local library. She'd been working extra hours, coming home exhausted, claiming budget cuts were forcing her to take on more responsibilities. "Aaron, please," she continued, and my blood ran cold. Aaron, our son-in-law, married to Sarah for 3 years now. Why would Marilyn be having such an intense conversation with him? And why did she sound so desperate? I set down my pen and moved closer to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and Marilyn's voice, barely audible now. "I told you, Patrick can't know about this. He would never understand." My name on her lips in that context felt like a punch to the gut. Never understand what? What was my wife of 3 decades hiding from me? "Tomorrow at 2, she said, after a long pause. "But this has to be the last time, Aaron. I mean it." The call ended, and I heard her footsteps approaching the study. I scrambled back to my desk, grabbing the invoice, and pretending to be absorbed in numbers that suddenly looked like meaningless scribbles. "How's the paperwork coming along?" Marilyn asked from the doorway, her voice bright and normal, as if she hadn't just been having a clandestine conversation with our son-in-law. I looked up at her, really looked. Her graying hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, but there were new lines around her brown eyes, lines that spoke of sleepless nights. When had those appeared? Her smile seemed forced, not reaching those tired eyes. "Fine," I managed, my voice coming out rougher than intended, "just the usual invoices and inventory reports." She nodded and moved into the room, placing a cup of coffee on my desk, black, the way I'd taken it for decades. Her hands were shaking slightly as she set it down. "Marilyn," I started, then stopped. What could I ask? How could I confront her about a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear? "Are you feeling all right? You seem tired lately." For a moment something flickered across her face. Fear? Guilt? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Just work," she said, but her laugh sounded hollow. "You know how it is. Mrs. Henderson is retiring next month, and they're making me cover her hours until they find a replacement." I nodded, accepting the explanation, even though something deep in my gut told me she was lying. Marilyn had never been a good liar. In 32 years, I could count on one hand the time she'd tried to deceive me, and each time her tells were obvious. The way she avoided eye contact, how she fidgeted with her wedding ring, the slight tremor in her voice. All of those signs were there now. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Marilyn slept beside me. Or at least I thought she was sleeping. Her breathing was too shallow, too controlled. In the darkness, I could feel the tension radiating from her body, see the way she clutched the blanket as if it were a lifeline. Something was very wrong, and it involved Aaron. The next morning brought no relief. Marilyn was already gone when I woke up, leaving only a note saying she had to open the library early. But I knew the library didn't open until 10, and it was barely 7:30. I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in over 2 years, and spent the morning wrestling with suspicions I didn't want to entertain. Were they having an affair? The thought made me physically ill. Aaron was 28, handsome in that clean-cut way that had charmed Sarah from their first date. Marilyn was 56, still beautiful, but in a mature, settled way. It seemed impossible, but what else could explain the secrecy? By 1:30 that afternoon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove to Aaron's house on Maple Street, a modest two-story he and Sarah had bought with help from both sets of parents. Sarah would be at work. She taught 3rd grade at the elementary school and wouldn't be home until after 4. As I turned onto Maple Street, I saw Marilyn's blue Honda Civic parked in Aaron's driveway. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles went white. There it was. Proof that whatever this was, it was real. I parked across the street and sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. What was I supposed to do? Storm up to the door and demand answers? Call Sarah and destroy her marriage based on suspicions? The rational part of my mind told me there could be an innocent explanation, but my heart was already breaking. Then I saw them through the living room window. Marilyn was sitting on Aaron's couch, her head in her hands. Aaron was pacing in front of her, gesturing emphatically. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in both their bodies. This wasn't a romantic encounter. It looked more like an argument, or maybe a negotiation. Aaron suddenly stopped pacing and pointed at something I couldn't see. Marilyn looked up, shaking her head vigorously. Whatever he was saying, she didn't want to hear it. Aaron moved closer to her, leaning down to speak directly into her face. The body language was all wrong, not intimate, but intimidating. My wife was afraid of our son-in-law. That realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an affair. Something else was happening here. Something that had Marilyn scared enough to lie to me for the first time in our marriage. I was still trying to process what I was seeing when Aaron straightened up and walked toward the window. For a terrifying moment, I thought he'd spotted me, but he was just closing the blinds. The last thing I saw was Marilyn's face, pale, drawn, and absolutely terrified. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. When Marilyn came home at 5:30, she seemed more relaxed than she had in weeks, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she'd asked thousands of times before. "Quiet," I replied, watching her carefully. "Yours?" "Busy. We're preparing for the annual book sale." Another lie, delivered with that same forced smile. That night, as we sat watching television, I found myself studying my wife like a stranger. Who was this woman I'd shared a bed with for over 3 decades? What secrets was she keeping? And what hold did Aaron have over her that could reduce her to the frightened woman I'd seen through that window? The answers would come soon enough. But as I sat there in our familiar living room, surrounded by 32 years of shared memories, I had no idea how completely they would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. 3 days passed before I heard another whispered phone call. This time I was ready for it. I'd started paying attention to patterns. How Marilyn's phone would ring at odd hours, how she'd suddenly announce errands that took longer than they should, how she'd return home looking drained and defeated. Each lie built on the previous one, creating a web of deception that was slowly strangling our marriage. Thursday evening, while Marilyn was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. Aaron's name flashed for just a moment before the call went to voicemail. 20 minutes later, after she'd gotten dressed and gone downstairs to start dinner, I heard her voice again from the kitchen, that same hushed, frightened tone that had become so familiar. "I can't do this anymore, Aaron," she was saying. "I'm exhausted. Patrick is starting to notice something's wrong." I crept closer to the kitchen doorway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. "No, I won't tell him." "You know I can't," her voice cracked. "But this has to end. Whatever you're planning, find another way." There was a long pause. I could picture her listening to whatever Aaron was saying on the other end, her face pale with that same fear I'd seen through his window. "Fine," she whispered finally. "Tomorrow at 3. But Aaron, I swear to you, this is the last time. After tomorrow, I'm done." The call ended, and I heard her lean against the counter, letting out a shaky breath. When she called me for dinner 5 minutes later, her voice was perfectly normal, as if that conversation had never happened. I barely touched my food that night. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, all my favorites, but everything tasted like cardboard. Marilyn chatted about her day at the library, about Mrs. Peterson's new book recommendations, about the weather forecast for the weekend. Normal conversation that felt like torture when I knew it was all performance. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Just thinking about work," I lied, and hated myself for how easily the deception came. We were both becoming people we'd never been before. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to Aaron's house the next day at 3 o'clock. Whatever was happening between them, whatever hold he had over my wife, I was going to end it. Friday dragged by like a prison sentence. I went through the motions at the hardware store, helping customers, checking inventory, processing orders. But my mind was elsewhere. Every time I looked at the clock, the hands seemed to have barely moved. At 2:30, I told my assistant manager I had a family emergency and left work early. The 20-minute drive to Aaron's house felt like hours. My hands were sweating as I gripped the steering wheel, and I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. What was I going to say when I got there? How do you confront someone about something you're not supposed to know? But I couldn't let this continue. Whatever Aaron was doing to Marilyn, it was destroying her, and by extension, destroying us. I turned onto Maple Street at exactly 3 o'clock, expecting to see Marilyn's blue Honda in the driveway again. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. 2 police cars were parked in front of Aaron's house, their red and blue lights flashing silently. An officer was standing on the front porch, and I could see movement through the windows. More uniforms, more activity. I parked quickly and got out of my car, my legs unsteady. As I approached the house, a tall officer with graying temples stepped into my path. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay back," he said firmly. "This is an active crime scene." "Crime scene?" The words came out as a croak. My wife, she might be in there. Marilyn Patterson, is she okay?" The officer's expression softened slightly. "Are you Patrick Patterson?" "Yes, that's me. How did you—" "Sir, I need you to step over here with me." He guided me away from the house toward his patrol car. "We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" My head was spinning. Nothing was making sense. "I don't understand. What's happening? Where's my wife?" "Mr. Patterson, we have a warrant for Aaron Daniels' arrest. Your wife is currently inside giving a statement. She's not in any danger, but I need you to stay out here until we're finished." "A warrant? For what?" But even as I asked the question, pieces were starting to fall into place. Marilyn's fear, the secretive phone calls, her exhaustion and stress. Whatever Aaron had been doing, it was criminal. "I can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation," the officer said, "but your wife has been very cooperative." She came forward voluntarily. Came forward. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Marilyn hadn't been having an affair with Aaron. She'd been, what, a witness? A victim? "How long has this been going on?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The officer looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "From what we understand, several months. Your wife finally found the courage to contact us yesterday." Yesterday. The day after that last phone call I'd overheard. The day after she'd told Aaron it had to end. I sank back against the patrol car, my legs suddenly unable to support me. For weeks, I'd been imagining the worst possible scenarios: affair, betrayal, the end of everything I'd built with Marilyn. But this was something else entirely. My wife hadn't been betraying me. She'd been protecting me. "Can I see her?" I asked. "Can I talk to her?" "Soon. They're just finishing up the statement now." "Mr. Patterson," the officer hesitated, "your wife has been through something traumatic. When she comes out, she's going to need your support, not your questions." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Through the front window of Aaron's house, I could see figures moving around. One of them was smaller, slighter than the others. Marilyn. 25 minutes later, the front door opened. Aaron came out first, his hands cuffed behind his back. He looked nothing like the charming young man who'd won Sarah's heart. His face was pale, his eyes darting around wildly until they found mine. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. I expected to see guilt, remorse, maybe even fear. Instead, I saw something that chilled me to the bone, pure, unadulterated hatred. Then Marilyn appeared in the doorway. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way I'd never seen before. Her usually neat hair was disheveled, and her clothes were wrinkled as if she'd been sitting in one position for hours. When she saw me standing by the police car, her face crumpled. She walked toward me slowly, as if she were afraid I might disappear. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped, her eyes searching my face. "Patrick," she whispered, "you weren't supposed to be here." "I know about the phone calls," I said gently. "I know you've been coming here." I couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You thought I was having an affair." I nodded, ashamed of how readily I'd believed the worst of her. "Oh, Patrick," her voice broke completely then, "I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. He said he would hurt you if I told anyone. He said he would hurt Sarah." Before I could respond, she collapsed into my arms, her whole body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. I held her tight, feeling 32 years of trust and love rushing back between us. Whatever Aaron had done, whatever he'd put her through, it was over now. But as I stood there holding my wife while police cars flashed their silent warnings around us, I knew that the worst was yet to come. The truth was still waiting to be revealed, and something told me it would be more devastating than anything I could have imagined. The drive home from Aaron's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Marilyn sat in the passenger seat staring out the window with hollow eyes, her hands twisted together in her lap. Every few minutes, her breath would hitch, like she was trying not to cry again. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but the police officer's words echoed in my mind. She needed support, not interrogation. So I drove in silence, stealing glances at the woman I'd shared my life with for over 3 decades, trying to reconcile this broken person with the strong, independent woman I'd married. When we pulled into our driveway, Marilyn made no move to get out of the car. She just sat there, staring at our house as if she'd never seen it before. "Marilyn," I said softly, "we're home." She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my chest tighten. Fear, yes, but also a deep, bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of secrets carried too long. "Patrick," she whispered, "there are things you don't know about me, things I should have told you years ago. Whatever it is, we can face it together." I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "No, you don't understand. What Aaron was doing, what he was making me do, it's because of something I did. Something terrible." My mouth went dry. "What kind of something?" She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, tears were streaming down her cheeks. "I killed someone, Patrick. 15 years ago, I killed someone, and Aaron found out." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat back in my seat, staring at her, waiting for her to tell me it was a joke, a mistake, anything but the truth I could see written across her face. "That's impossible," I said finally. "Marilyn, you wouldn't hurt a fly. You cry when you accidentally step on ants in the garden." "I was driving home from Sarah's college graduation party," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "You remember that night? You had the flu, so you stayed home. I went alone." I did remember. Sarah had graduated from State University with her teaching degree. Marilyn had been so proud, so excited. She'd come home late, after midnight, saying the celebration had gone longer than expected. I had 2 glasses of wine at the party. Just 2, over the course of 4 hours. "I wasn't drunk, Patrick. I swear I wasn't drunk." Her voice was pleading now, desperate for me to believe her. "What happened?" My own voice sounded strange, distant. "It was raining. You remember how bad the storms were that week? I was driving down Riverside Road, and it was so dark. The streetlights were out because of the storm." She was speaking faster now, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them back for 15 years. "There was a man walking along the side of the road. I didn't see him until the last second. I swerved, but—" She choked on a sob. "I hit him, Patrick. I felt the impact, heard the sound. It was the most horrible sound I've ever heard in my life." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what she was telling me. My wife, my gentle, caring wife, had killed someone. "I stopped the car," she continued. "I got out to help him, but he was already dead. His neck was broken. There was so much blood. Her whole body was shaking now. I checked for a pulse, tried CPR, everything I could think of, but it was too late." "Why didn't you call the police?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. I panicked. I was terrified. I kept thinking about Sarah, about you, about how this would destroy our family. The man, he was homeless, Patrick. No ID, no family looking for him. I convinced myself that calling the police wouldn't bring him back, would only ruin more lives. She turned to face me fully, her eyes red and swollen. I drove home and told you I was tired from the party. I went upstairs and threw up until there was nothing left. Then I got in the shower and scrubbed my skin raw, but I could never wash away what I'd done. I stared at my hands, trying to make sense of everything. 15 years. For 15 years, she'd carried this secret alone. The car, I said suddenly. There would have been damage. I took it to a body shop the next day, told them I'd hit a deer on a back road. They fixed the dent and replaced the headlight, no questions asked. She let out a bitter laugh. I paid cash so there wouldn't be any insurance records. And no one ever found the body? Not for 3 days. When they did, they assumed he'd been hit by someone who didn't stop, a hit and run. The police investigated for a few weeks, but with no witnesses and no evidence. She shrugged helplessly. I felt sick, not just because of what she'd done, but because of how alone she must have felt all these years. How many nights had she lain awake beside me, tormented by guilt while I slept peacefully, oblivious to her pain? How did Aaron find out? I asked. Her face hardened. About 6 months ago, he started asking strange questions. Casual at first, about that night, about Sarah's graduation. Then he mentioned the homeless man who'd been found dead on Riverside Road. Said he'd been researching local cold cases for some podcast he was supposedly working on. The pieces were falling into place now. Aaron, with his tech background, would have the skills to dig into old records, to piece together information that others might miss. He connected your car to the body shop records, I said. She nodded. The mechanic I'd used kept detailed files. Aaron somehow got access to them, found the work order for a car matching mine from the right time period. Then he started watching me, following me, until he was sure. When did he confront you? 3 months ago. He came to the library after closing time. At first, he was almost gentle about it, said he understood it was an accident, that he didn't want to hurt our family, but then he started asking for things. What kind of things? Marilyn's voice dropped to a whisper. Money at first, small amounts. 500 here, 1,000 there. He said he needed help with credit card debt, that he was embarrassed to ask Sarah. I emptied my savings account, took cash advances on credit cards you didn't know about. My stomach churned. How much? Almost $30,000? The number hung in the air between us like a physical presence. $30,000. No wonder she'd been working extra hours at the library, claiming they needed help with budget cuts. She'd been trying to replace the money she'd been giving to Aaron. But it wasn't just money, was it? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. No. Her voice was barely audible now. He started asking me to lie for him. Small things at first. Tell Sarah he'd been with me when he was actually somewhere else. Confirm stories about where he'd been or what he'd done. Then the lies got bigger. What was he doing, Marilyn? She looked at me with eyes full of shame and regret. He was having an affair, multiple affairs. He's been cheating on Sarah almost since the day they got married, and he was using me to cover for him. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in my gut. Not just Aaron's betrayal of Sarah, but the way he'd forced Marilyn to be complicit in it. And if you didn't help him, he'd tell you about the accident. He'd tell Sarah. He'd call the police and have me arrested for vehicular manslaughter and fleeing the scene. Her voice broke completely. He said no jury would believe it was an accident after I'd hidden it for 15 years. I reached for her hand again, and this time, she didn't pull away. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling against mine. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Marilyn, we could have faced this together. We could have... Could have what? She interrupted. Patrick, I killed someone. I left a human being dead on the side of the road and drove home to our warm house and our comfortable life. What kind of person does that? A terrified person, I said firmly. A person who made a terrible mistake in a moment of panic. It wasn't just a moment, she said. Every day for 15 years, I chose to keep that secret. Every day, I chose to let that man's death go unpunished. And every day, I lied to you about who I really was. Tears were streaming down both our faces now. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her whole body shake with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. You're not a killer, I whispered into her hair. You're the woman who cries at sad movies, who won't kill spiders because they have families too. You're the woman who volunteers at the animal shelter and brings soup to sick neighbors. One terrible night doesn't erase 32 years of kindness. Aaron said you'd never forgive me, she whispered against my chest. He said you'd leave me the moment you found out. I pulled back to look at her face. Aaron is a manipulative bastard who's been torturing you for months. He doesn't know me, and he sure as hell doesn't know us. For the first time since she'd started talking, something like hope flickered in her eyes. What happens now? She asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything settling on my shoulders. Aaron was in custody, but the secret was out now. There would be consequences, legal and otherwise. Our daughter would have to learn that her husband was a cheating blackmailer, and her mother was responsible for someone's death. But as I sat there holding my wife in our driveway, surrounded by 32 years of shared memories, I knew one thing for certain. We would face whatever came next together. Now we tell the truth, I said, all of it, and we deal with whatever happens. Marilyn nodded against my chest, and for the first time in months, I felt her truly relax in my arms. The worst was finally over, or so I thought. That evening, we sat in our living room like strangers. Marilyn had made tea, but both our cups sat untouched on the coffee table, growing cold as we struggled to find words for everything that had been revealed. The house felt different somehow, as if the secret that had been poisoning our marriage had left a residue that would take time to clear. Every familiar object, the family photos on the mantel, the Afghan Marilyn's mother had knitted, the reading chair where I'd spent countless evenings, seemed to belong to a different version of our lives. There's more, Marilyn said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between us for the better part of an hour. My stomach clenched. I'd thought we'd reached the bottom of this nightmare, but apparently there were deeper depths to explore. More about the accident? I asked. More about Aaron. She picked up her teacup with shaking hands, took a small sip, then set it back down. Patrick, what I told you about the affairs, about him using me to cover for him, that was just the beginning. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What else? She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at our quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson was walking her dog. The Johnsons were bringing in their garbage cans. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the kind of secrets that were tearing our world apart. He's been stealing from Sarah, she said without turning around. Money from their joint account, items from the house. He sells her jewelry when she's at work, then tells her she must have misplaced it. Jesus. I ran my hands through my hair. How do you know this? Because he made me help him. Her voice was barely a whisper. 2 months ago, he had me come over when Sarah was at school. He wanted me to help him stage a break-in. The words hit me like a physical blow. You helped him rob his own house? He said if I didn't, he'd send the police photos of my car from that night 15 years ago. Photos he claimed to have found showing damage that matched the accident. She turned to face me, her eyes hollow. I don't know if he really had them or if he was bluffing, but I couldn't take the chance. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this confession with the woman I'd thought I married, but then I remembered the fear I'd seen in her eyes these past months, the way she'd jumped at unexpected noises, how she'd been losing weight and sleeping poorly. What did you do? I helped him move some of Sarah's grandmother's jewelry to make it look like someone had broken in and taken only the most valuable pieces. He had already sold them weeks earlier, but Sarah didn't know that yet. She wrapped her arms around herself. Then he broke a window from the inside and messed up the house enough to make it look convincing. Sarah filed a police report? Marilyn nodded miserably. Insurance paid out $12,000. Aaron kept every penny. $12,000 stolen from our daughter, and Marilyn had been forced to help. The scope of Aaron's manipulation was staggering, but what bothered me most was how systematically he'd been destroying our family while wearing the mask of a loving husband. There's something else, Marilyn continued, about the night I hit that man. My blood ran cold. What about it? She came back to the couch, sitting on the edge as if she might need to run at any moment. Aaron didn't just find out about it by accident. He was looking for something specific, something he could use against our family. Why would he do that? Because we're not his first victims, Patrick. While he was blackmailing me, I started paying attention to the people he talked about, the stories he told. There were inconsistencies, gaps that didn't make sense. She pulled out her phone and showed me a notes app filled with dates and details. I'd never seen this methodical side of my wife. But months of living under Aaron's thumb had apparently taught her to be careful and thorough. Remember his college friend Marcus, the one who supposedly died in a car accident 2 years ago? I nodded. Aaron had been devastated, or so it seemed. Sarah had spent weeks comforting him through his grief. I looked up the obituary. Marcus didn't die in a car accident. He committed suicide. And before he died, he'd been facing charges for embezzlement at his job. She scrolled through her notes. I found posts on social media from Marcus's family, talking about how someone had been blackmailing him, demanding money to keep quiet about some mistake he'd made years earlier. The implications were staggering. You think Aaron drove him to suicide? I think Aaron has been doing this for years, finding people's secrets, their mistakes, their vulnerabilities, and using them for his own gain. Her voice was getting stronger now, less broken, and more angry. We weren't unlucky victims, Patrick. We were carefully chosen targets. I stood up and began pacing, my mind racing. But why us? Why our family? Because Sarah fell in love with him, and that gave him access to us. And because he knew that if he could find something on one of us, he could control all of us. Baya? She looked up at me with eyes that were finally clear of the fog of fear that had clouded them for months. He researched us before he even asked Sarah out, found out about my job, my schedule, my routines. He was looking for an opening, a weakness he could exploit. The homeless man, I said, the pieces clicking into place. How did he even know to look into that specific incident? I think he'd been watching me for weeks, maybe months, following me, learning my habits. He noticed that every year around Sarah's graduation date, I got depressed. I'd make excuses not to drive on Riverside Road. I'd have nightmares. She paused. You probably noticed it too, but you were kind enough not to say anything. I had noticed. Every May, Marilyn would become quiet and withdrawn for a few days around the anniversary of Sarah's graduation. I'd attributed it to empty nest syndrome, the bittersweet realization that our daughter was truly an adult. So he started digging into what happened that weekend, I said, and eventually found the connection between my behavior and that unsolved hit and run. She stood up, and for the first time in months, she looked like the strong woman I'd married. Patrick, we can't let him get away with this. Not just what he did to us, but what he did to Marcus, and probably others we don't even know about. The police have him now, I pointed out. For what? The blackmail charges are based on my testimony, but I'm also confessing to vehicular manslaughter. A good lawyer could argue that Aaron was just trying to convince a killer to do the right thing. She shook her head. And even if they can make the blackmail charges stick, what about the insurance fraud? What about Marcus? What about the next family he targets? She was right. Aaron was smart, manipulative, and patient. Even if this setback slowed him down, it wouldn't stop him. He'd find a way to weasel out of serious consequences, and then he'd disappear and start over somewhere else. What are you proposing? I asked. I'm going to tell the police everything, not just about the blackmail, but about the insurance fraud, about Marcus, about everything I've learned about his pattern of behavior. He took a shaky breath. And I'm going to confess to the hit and run. Marilyn, no. If you confess now, after all these years, I should have confessed 15 years ago, she interrupted. That man deserved justice, and his family deserved closure. I can't change what I did, but I can finally do the right thing. I stared at her, seeing the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The fear and shame were still there, but underneath them was the core of strength and integrity that had drawn me to her in the first place. What about Sarah? I asked. This is going to destroy her world. Marilyn's face crumpled for a moment. I know. She's going to find out that her husband is a manipulative criminal, and her mother is responsible for someone's death. She's going to hate us both. She won't hate you, I said firmly. She'll be hurt and confused and angry, but she won't hate you. You're her mother, and you're finally doing the right thing. And you? She asked, her voice small and vulnerable. After everything I've told you, after all the lies and the cowardice, Can you ever forgive me?" I crossed the room and took her hands in mine. They were steady now, no longer trembling with fear and shame. "Marilyn, you made a terrible mistake 15 years ago, and then you made it worse by hiding it. But Aaron," I paused, feeling anger rise in my chest. "Aaron is evil. He's a predator who fed on your guilt and used it to torture you for months. He forced you to betray your own daughter, to participate in crimes against her." "I could have said no," she whispered. "Could you? Really? When he was threatening to destroy our family, to have you arrested, to tell Sarah that her mother was a killer?" I shook my head. "He didn't give you choices, Marilyn. He trapped you and then systematically broke you down until you didn't think you had any options left." Tears were flowing down her cheeks again, but these felt different, cleaner somehow. "Tomorrow, we're going to the police station together," I said. "You're going to tell them everything you know about Aaron's crimes, and yes, you're going to confess to the hit and run. But whatever happens after that, we face it together." She nodded, squeezing my hands tightly. "What if I go to prison? Then I'll wait for you. However long it takes, I'll be here when you get out." I pulled her into my arms. "We've been married for 32 years, Marilyn. I didn't stop loving you when I thought you were having an affair. And I'm not going to stop loving you because you made a terrible mistake under the worst possible circumstances." We held each other in our living room as the sun set outside, both of us knowing that tomorrow would bring consequences we couldn't predict or control. But for the first time in months, we were truly together again. The secret that had poisoned our marriage was finally out in the open. Now we had to find a way to heal from the damage it had caused, and somehow rebuild trust that had been shattered by months of necessary lies. Aaron had tried to destroy us by exploiting our greatest weakness. Instead, he'd shown us our greatest strength. After 32 years together, our love was still stronger than our secrets. The police station at 8 in the morning felt like a different world from the one we'd left the day before. Detective Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s with kind but tired eyes, led us to a small conference room that smelled of stale coffee and resignation. "Mrs. Patterson," she said as we settled into uncomfortable metal chairs, "you said on the phone that you had additional information about Aaron Daniels." Marilyn's hand found mine under the table, her fingers cold but steady. We'd spent most of the night talking, planning what she would say, how much detail to include. By dawn, we both looked like we'd aged a decade, but there was something lighter in Marilyn's eyes. The weight of 15 years of secrets was finally lifting. "Detective Rodriguez," Marilyn began, her voice clear and strong, "I need to confess to a crime. 15 years ago, I killed a man in a hit-and-run accident, and Aaron Daniels has been blackmailing me about it for the past 3 months." The detective's pen stopped moving across her notepad. She looked up at Marilyn with an expression that was carefully neutral, professional. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to inform you of your rights before we continue this conversation." The Miranda warning felt surreal, like something from a television show, rather than our real life. But Marilyn listened carefully, nodded at the appropriate moments, and signed the waiver acknowledging that she understood her rights and wanted to continue speaking. "Tell me about the accident," Detective Rodriguez said. For the next hour, Marilyn recounted everything: the graduation party, the rain, the homeless man on Riverside Road. She spoke in precise, measured sentences, not trying to minimize her actions or make excuses. When she described the sound of the impact, her voice broke only slightly before she regained control. Detective Rodriguez took notes, but didn't interrupt. When Marilyn finished describing how she'd hidden the damage to her car, the detective asked, "Why are you confessing now?" "Because Aaron Daniels has been using my guilt to force me to participate in other crimes," Marilyn said, "and because I should have confessed 15 years ago." She then told the detective everything about Aaron's systematic manipulation, the money he'd extorted, the fake break-in at his own house, his pattern of targeting vulnerable people. She showed Detective Rodriguez her notes about Marcus and the suspicious circumstances around his suicide. "Mrs. Patterson," the detective said when Marilyn had finished, "this is a very serious confession. Vehicular manslaughter, fleeing the scene of an accident. Even after 15 years, these charges carry significant penalties. I understand, Marilyn said quietly. I'm ready to face the consequences. Detective Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. The case you're referring to, the homeless man on Riverside Road? I remember it. I was a patrol officer then. We worked that case for months, but we never had any leads. Did he have a family? Marilyn asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. Someone who was looking for him? The detective's expression softened slightly. His name was David Chen. He was 53 years old, a veteran who'd been struggling with addiction and homelessness for several years. He had a sister in California who'd been trying to find him for months when he died. Marilyn covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 15 years of imagining him as a faceless victim, and now he had a name, a history, a family who'd been searching for him. She deserves to know what happened to her brother, Marilyn whispered. Detective Rodriguez nodded. I'll contact her once we've processed your statement. Lust. The next 3 hours were a blur of paperwork, additional questioning, and phone calls to the district attorney's office. Marilyn was formally arrested and booked, though they allowed her to remain out on her own recognizance pending arraignment. I called our daughter from the parking lot of the police station. Dad? Sarah's voice was bright and cheerful. She was probably getting ready for school, preparing for another day of teaching third graders. In 5 minutes, her world was going to implode. Sarah, I need you to sit down. Your mother and I need to talk to you about something very serious. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats. Is Mom okay? Are you okay? We're okay. But there are things you need to know about Aaron and about your mother. Can you come to the house after school? Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on? I looked through the window of the police station where Marilyn was still answering questions. Aaron was arrested yesterday. He's been charged with blackmail and insurance fraud. What? Sarah's voice was sharp with disbelief. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, sweetheart. And there are other things. Things about why he was blackmailing your mother. We need to tell you everything, but not over the phone. Another long silence. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was small and frightened. How bad is it, Dad? It's bad, I admitted, but we're going to get through it together. That afternoon, Sarah sat in our living room in the same chair where I'd eavesdropped on Marilyn's phone calls just days earlier. She looked young and vulnerable in her teacher clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that reminded me painfully of her mother. Marilyn sat across from her, and I could see the family resemblance more clearly than ever. The same determined jawline, the same expressive brown eyes. But where Sarah's face showed confusion and fear, Marilyn showed the exhaustion of someone who had finally stopped running from the truth. Mom, Sarah said after Marilyn had finished explaining everything, you killed someone? The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marilyn nodded, unable to speak. And Aaron knew about it? He was blackmailing you? Sarah's voice was getting higher, more strained with each question. Yes. And you helped him stage a break-in at my house? You helped him steal from me? This time Marilyn's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. I don't understand any of this. 3 days ago I thought I had a normal family. I thought I was married to a man who loved me. I thought my mother was... She stopped, shaking her head. I thought my mother was someone I could trust. The accusation hit Marilyn like a physical blow. She doubled over slightly, as if Sarah had punched her in the stomach. Sarah, I said carefully, your mother was being threatened. Don't, Sarah turned on me, her eyes blazing. Don't make excuses for her. She chose to lie to us for 15 years. She chose to help Aaron steal from me instead of telling us the truth. She was protecting you, I said. Aaron threatened to hurt you if she told anyone. She was protecting herself, Sarah shot back. If she'd told the truth 15 years ago, none of this would have happened. That man's family would have had closure. Aaron wouldn't have had anything to blackmail her with. My marriage wouldn't be a lie built on extortion and fraud. Marilyn looked up at our daughter with tears streaming down her face. You're right, she said quietly. Everything you're saying is absolutely right. I was a coward 15 years ago, and I've been paying for that cowardice ever since. But Sarah, I need you to know that every lie I told, every crime I helped Aaron commit, It was because I was terrified of losing you." "Well, congratulations," Sarah said bitterly. "You've lost me anyway." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I followed her, catching her arm gently. "Sarah, please, don't leave like this." She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that broke my heart. It wasn't just anger or disappointment. It was the look of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just been shattered. "Dad, I need time to process this. I need to figure out how to tell my students why I won't be in school tomorrow, how to explain to my principal why my husband was arrested, how to find a lawyer for the divorce I apparently need to file." Her voice cracked. "I need to call that man's sister and apologize for something my mother did before I was even married." "You don't have to carry your mother's burden," I said. "Don't I?" She looked back toward the living room where Marilyn sat alone. "She's my mother. Aaron is my husband. This whole mess is my family. How is that not my burden?" She pulled away from me gently but firmly. "I love you both, but I can't be here right now. I can't look at her and not think about that man dying alone on the side of the road. I can't think about my marriage without remembering that it was built on lies and blackmail." "Where will you go?" "To my friend Jessica's house. I need to be around someone whose life isn't falling apart." She paused at the door. "Tell Mom I'll call her when I'm ready to talk, but Dad, it's going to be a long time." After Sarah left, I found Marilyn exactly where I'd left her, sitting in the living room, staring at her hands. "She hates me," Marilyn said without looking up. "She's hurt and angry and confused. She doesn't hate you. She should hate me." Marilyn's voice was flat, empty. "I've destroyed her life just as surely as Aaron did. More, actually, because this all started with my cowardice." I sat down beside her and took her hand. "Marilyn, you made a terrible mistake 15 years ago, but Aaron is the one who chose to use that mistake to hurt people. He's the one who manipulated and threatened and stole. You were his victim too." "Was I?" She looked at me with hollow eyes. "Or was I just someone who was willing to let other people pay the price for my mistakes?" I didn't have an answer for that. The truth was complicated, messy in the way that real life always is. Marilyn had been both victim and perpetrator, forced to make impossible choices because of a decision she'd made 15 years earlier. That night, we lay in bed listening to the silence of our house. No phone calls from Aaron. No whispered conversations full of fear and desperation, just quiet, and the weight of everything that had been revealed. "What happens now?" Marilyn asked in the darkness. "Now we wait for the legal system to decide your fate. We hope Sarah eventually forgives us. We try to rebuild our lives from whatever pieces are left. And if I go to prison?" I pulled her closer to me, feeling her heart beating against my chest. "Then I'll visit you every chance I get. I'll write you letters every day. I'll be here when you get out." "Why?" she whispered. "After everything I've done, everything I've put you through, why are you staying?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. "Because 32 years ago, I promised to love you in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. This is the worst part, but the love part, that hasn't changed," she cried then, quietly but deeply, and I held her until she fell asleep. Outside our window, the world continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the fact that our family had just been torn apart and was slowly, carefully, trying to figure out how to put itself back together. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and court dates and phone calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. But tonight, for the first time in months, my wife was sleeping peacefully in my arms. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. 2 years later, I stood in the garden behind our small rental house in Oregon, watching Marilyn tend to the tomato plants we'd put in that spring. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if she were handling something precious. In a way, I suppose she was. Everything felt precious now. The simple act of being together, the freedom to make choices, the luxury of quiet mornings without fear. Marilyn had served 18 months in a minimum security facility for vehicular manslaughter and fleeing the scene of an accident. The judge had taken into account her cooperation with authorities, her lack of prior criminal history, and the circumstances that led to her confession. Aaron's systematic blackmail had been documented thoroughly during his trial, painting a clear picture of psychological coercion that worked in Marilyn's favor. Aaron himself had received 8 years for multiple counts of blackmail, insurance fraud, and what prosecutors called a pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable individuals. The investigation, Marilyn's confession, had uncovered 3 other victims, including Marcus's family, who finally had answers about what had driven their son to suicide. The hardest part hadn't been the legal proceedings or even Marilyn's time in prison. The hardest part had been losing Sarah. Our daughter had filed for divorce within a week of Aaron's arrest. She'd moved across the country to Portland, taking a teaching position at a private school where no one knew her story. For the first year, she wouldn't speak to either of us. The few text messages she sent were cold, factual updates about her address or her health. Nothing more. She needs time, Dr. Martinez, our counselor, had said during one of our sessions. She's not just processing her mother's confession or her husband's betrayal. She's rebuilding her entire understanding of trust, of family, of who she is. The counseling had been my idea. After Marilyn was sentenced, I'd realized that surviving this crisis wasn't just about waiting for her to come home. It was about figuring out how to build a marriage based on complete honesty for the first time in 15 years. Mr. Patterson, Dr. Martinez had said during our first session, "Your wife carried a devastating secret for 15 years. That kind of isolation, that level of self-imposed punishment, it changes a person. You're not just rebuilding trust, you're getting to know each other again." She was right. The woman who came home from prison was both the Marilyn I'd always known and someone entirely new. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep sadness, but also a kind of strength I'd never seen before. She'd lost weight during her incarceration, and there were new lines around her eyes, but she carried herself differently, straighter, like someone who'd finally stopped running. We'd moved to Oregon 6 months ago, partly for a fresh start, and partly to be closer to Sarah, though our daughter still wasn't ready to see us. We'd sold our house back home. Too many reporters, too many neighbors who looked at us with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The hardware store had been understanding about my leave of absence during Marilyn's trial, but when they offered me the manager position at their Portland location, it felt like a sign. "The tomatoes are coming along nicely," Marilyn said, straightening up and wiping her hands on her gardening gloves. "We should have fresh ones by August." I walked over to join her, looking at the small green fruits just beginning to form. "Remember the garden at the old house? You could never get anything to grow properly." She smiled, the real smile that had taken months to return. I was too impatient then, wanted everything to happen quickly, on my schedule. She gestured to the neat rows of vegetables we'd planted together. "Prison teaches you patience, if nothing else." We stood there in comfortable silence, something that had taken time to rediscover. For months after her release, every quiet moment had felt loaded with unspoken thoughts, unresolved guilt. But gradually, we'd learned to be together without constantly processing the past. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. Marilyn and I had made a rule about not letting calls interrupt our garden time. But something made me check the screen. Sarah. I hadn't seen my daughter's name on my phone in 3 months. My heart immediately started racing. "It's Sarah," I told Marilyn, whose face went pale. "Answer it," she whispered. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad." Sarah's voice was different somehow, still cautious, but without the sharp edge it had carried for so long. "Are you busy?" "Never too busy for you. How are you?" "I'm..." A long pause. "I'm in therapy, Dad. Real therapy. Not just the crisis counseling after everything happened. I've been going for 6 months now." I looked at Marilyn, who was watching my face intently, trying to read the conversation from my expressions. "That's good, Sarah. That's really good. My therapist thinks I'm ready to try talking to you and Mom, not about forgiveness, not yet, but about moving forward." Her voice was careful, measured. "Would you be open to that?" "Of course, absolutely, whatever you need. I want to meet somewhere neutral, not your house, not mine. And I want to bring my therapist with me, at least for the first meeting. Whatever makes you comfortable." Another pause. "There's something else, Dad. Something I need to tell you both." My chest tightened. "What is it?" David Chen's sister, Linda. I've been in touch with her. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. David Chen, the man Marilyn had killed. I'd known his sister had been contacted by the police, but we'd never heard anything more about her. Sarah, I said carefully, why would you? Because I needed to understand, she interrupted. I needed to know about the person Mom killed, about the family she left behind. I couldn't move forward without knowing. I gestured frantically to Marilyn, who moved closer so she could hear. What did she tell you? I asked. She told me about David, about how he'd struggled with PTSD after coming back from Afghanistan, how he'd lost his job, his apartment, his family's trust, how she'd been looking for him for 2 years before he died. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. And she told me something else, something I think Mom needs to hear. What? Linda said that David had called her the week before he died. He was clean, Dad. For the first time in years, he was sober. He was trying to get his life back together. He was walking to a job interview that night when he couldn't finish the sentence. I felt Marilyn's hand grip my arm so tightly it hurt. She'd heard every word. But Linda also said something else, Sarah continued. She said she forgave the person who hit him. She said she understood it was an accident, and she was grateful that whoever did it finally came forward. She said closure was more important to her than punishment. Tears were streaming down Marilyn's face. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the sobs. Sarah, I said, my own voice thick with emotion, why are you telling us this? Because I realized something in therapy. I was so angry at Mom for lying, for hiding the truth, that I forgot to be grateful that she finally told it. And I was so focused on the fact that she killed someone that I forgot she's also the woman who taught me to help injured animals, who volunteers at soup kitchens, who cried when she accidentally stepped on a spider. I could hear her crying now, but she pushed on. David Chen's death was a tragedy. Mom's decision to hide it was wrong. But she's not a monster, Dad. She's a person who made a terrible mistake and then compounded it by making another terrible mistake. Sarah? I want to try, Dad. I want to try to have a relationship with you and Mom again. Not the way it was before, because that was built on a lie. But something new, something honest. I looked at Marilyn, who was nodding through her tears. We would like that very much, I said. When do you want to meet? Next week. I'll text you the details. She paused. Dad? Tell Mom. Tell her I love her. I'm still angry, and I'm still hurt, but I love her. I'll tell her. And Dad? I'm proud of you for standing by her, for helping her through this. I don't know if I could have done that. After we hung up, Marilyn and I held each other in the garden, both of us crying. Not the desperate, grief-stricken tears of the past 2 years, but something cleaner. Tears of relief, of hope, of possibilities we'd been afraid to imagine. She forgives me, Marilyn whispered against my chest. Linda Chen or Sarah? Both. Neither. I don't know. She pulled back to look at me. Patrick, I spent 15 years carrying David Chen's death like a stone in my chest. And then I spent 3 months living in terror that Aaron would destroy our family if I told the truth. But for the past 2 years, the worst part hasn't been the guilt or the fear. It's been losing Sarah. We haven't lost her, I said. She's finding her way back to us. Marilyn nodded, wiping her eyes. Do you think we can really do this? Build something new? I looked around our small garden, at the tomatoes that would ripen in their own time, at the house we'd made into a home, despite everything we'd lost. I think we already are. 3 weeks later, we met Sarah at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. She looked older, more serious than I remembered, but there was something peaceful in her face that hadn't been there before. Her therapist, Dr. Kumar, was a young woman with kind eyes who sat quietly while we talked. The conversation was awkward at first, full of careful words and long pauses, but gradually we found our rhythm. Sarah talked about her new job, her apartment, the pottery class she'd started taking. We told her about the garden, about my work at the hardware store, about the hiking trails we'd discovered. We didn't talk about the past, not that day, but we made plans to meet again the following month, and then the month after that. 6 months later, Sarah came to our house for the first time. She brought a casserole and a small cactus for our kitchen windowsill. She stayed for 3 hours, helping Marilyn with dinner and listening to my stories about the difficult customers at the hardware store. As she was leaving, she hugged us both. Marilyn first, holding her for a long time without speaking, then me. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear. "For what?" "For showing me what unconditional love looks like. For proving that families can survive anything if they choose love over fear." Standing in our doorway, watching our daughter drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. Not happiness exactly. Too much had been lost and broken for simple happiness. But peace. The deep abiding contentment that comes from finally living in truth. Marilyn took my hand as we went back inside. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, staying with me through all of this. I thought about the question seriously. The past 2 years had been the hardest of our marriage. We'd lost our home, our community, our financial security. We'd watched our daughter's trust shatter and spent months not knowing if we could rebuild it. We'd faced judgment from strangers and abandonment from friends. But we'd also discovered something profound about ourselves and each other. We'd learned that love isn't just about the good times, the easy choices, the perfect moments. Real love, the kind that lasts, is about standing together when everything falls apart. "No," I said finally, "I don't regret it. This version of us, the one built on complete honesty, is stronger than anything we had before." That night, we sat in our living room reading, the same way we'd done thousands of times over the years, but now it felt different. Before, our companionable silences had been built partly on things unsaid, secrets hidden. Now, the quiet was genuine peace. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, but inside our small house, we were warm and safe, and for the first time in years, completely honest with each other. It wasn't the life we'd planned, but it was the life we'd chosen. And that, I'd learned, made all the difference.